we can't go live. No, we're live. Hey, everybody. It's Game Audio Hour number 35. That's a bunch. I'm pretty stoked about that. It's our weekly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences, to audio secrets. Here's where you'll find your in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. And Vince, how you doing, man?
Oh man, doing okay. Wow, it's already been 35 episodes, so now the show has been around for more episodes than I've been years on this planet. That's kind of exciting. It's time for this show's midlife crisis, I guess.
This show is buying a Porsche next weekend. Sponsored by Porsche. We should do that. See if they'll do it.
I don't know, maybe one of those old 968s that is good for just dying on the side of the road or something.
You know what I just realized is I've forgotten my glasses and I need a haircut. So those of you listening to the stream, you're very lucky this week because I am a mess. Look at this. I need to shave. I've got hair everywhere. Speaking of shaving and hair everywhere, what's up, Alex?
That was a beautiful segue. Yeah,
it's one of the things I do best.
I have to apologize in advance. I'm actually in my bedroom at the moment and I'm speaking from an iPad. Having some, hopefully you can all see me because I'm looking at black screen here, so I can, apparently you can see me, I think, and hear me.
Yep. What?
Yep. But yeah, so consequently I'm hairy and I shaved this morning.
No, I think you're just fine. No,
I'm hairy
but
though.
I was going to say that, you know, we're audio guys. We don't need to make video work.
No, that's right.
To be heard, not seen.
That's perfect. Behind the scenes.
Do we actually have any statistics on how many people actually watch versus how many people listen?
A wiser guy than me, if somebody could help me figure that stuff out from iTunes, that would be, or from YouTube even, that would be very helpful. I don't know how to tell. Even iTunes makes it very vague, at least my rudimentary knowledge of how to find that information out. But iTunes makes it very difficult for us to figure out how many people have actually subscribed.
Yeah, I think out of the 600 million people who actually do enjoy the show every week,
yes,
it would be good to know like what percentage of that 600 million, or is it 700 million, somewhere around there anyway. You know, it's just a ballpark figure.
Yeah,
it'd be good to know like what percentage actually enjoy it. With our lovely mugs on their screen versus how many people enjoy it, just the audio.
Yeah, I do think that if you were to split the ratio of people who are listening to the show, given how many people are watching the show, we would be watching the show, I think iTunes said was the entire Eurasian continent, and then listening to the show is just the people who are in the... never mind, this is really going badly. Oh my God! So don't make me tell jokes today. I've been up. I was up till 4 a.m. and then woke up at 7 to take my daughter to school, and I've been up for work since. So it's been really fun. My brain is not working, and I've written some of the worst music in my life today. It's very productive.
No, it's okay because you're gonna go back to that music tomorrow, and you'll realize, holy crap, I was a genius yesterday. I need to do this more often.
Yeah, I should deprive myself of sleep. We have a sick dog to explain, and unfortunately, he didn't have a good night last night. He's 16, though, this dog.
Wow.
Pretty awesome guy, and I'm hoping that Friday when we take him to the vet, it's going to end up being good news, you know. But we want him to live a happy life, not satisfying us. We want him to be comfortable. So hopefully it'll all be okay. But anyway, so with that in mind, we have a subject today, and it's from Alex, and we waited for Alex to get back from the Tokyo Game Show so we could do it with Alex. And it was a brilliant idea. Alex, do you want to introduce it? Because I love doing that to you.
Sure. You know, I'm getting pretty good at this now. It occurred to me that being that we're all in game audio, of course, but we're also all musicians, and that means that we play instruments of some form or other. And one thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently is how our different respective instruments actually affect and influence our approach to writing music. For example, if you have a drummer writing a piece of music for an action game, is it going to somehow be a little different than, say, I don't know, like a brass player who's writing a piece of music for an action game? Does the approach as musicians, does it influence the way that we write music, the way that even the workflow, the order that we put music together, or just how the instrument affects our approach? So that was the idea for the topic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, do you want to go first with your with the things that you've noticed?
Well, let's first begin by talking about which instruments we play. So I play bass. Vince, how about you?
Well, I've played piano pretty much my whole life, and then I recently started getting into the iwi, which is the electric wind instrument, which plays kind of like a saxophone, but it's electric and amplified and all that good stuff.
Is it actually the fingering is exactly the same as a saxophone?
No, it's not the exact same. It does share some properties, like it has a bis key on top. It doesn't have the side key, and there's some trills that you can't do on an iwi that are very easy to do on a sax, but also the reverse holds true for some other fingerings. But it's very similar to the saxophone. Many saxophonists pick up the iwi as a second instrument.
Do you need a reed, or do you need like a special embouchure to play the iwi, or you just blow into a tube?
No, yeah, it's basically recorder style with a bite piece. So you bite on this sort of soft silicone piece, and then you blow as you maintain pressure with your teeth.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So it's not quite as hard as an embouchure for a single reed or much less a double reed instrument, but there's some things that you have to learn with it.
Okay, and then in our presence here we have the rock god himself.
Pete Townsend?
No, close. Carl Johnson.
Oh, I got so excited. I thought you said Pete Townsend was here.
Well, Carl Johnson, Pete Townsend, if they say them fast enough, they kind of sound the same, don't they?
I play a very complicated instrument called the radio. I don't do that very well either.
Go on, stop being modest. Stop being modest. It's Carl Johnson, everybody. Carl Johnson.
No, I'm. You just wasted claps.
Carl Johnson. Put your hands together. There you go.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Excuse my language. Instruments. So, I started off on violin as my first instrument, and then I just stayed with stringed instruments. But it wasn't cool to play violin when I was growing up. I remember having.
That's really funny because actually I started on a Baroque instrument called the viola da gamba.
Yeah.
I actually switched to violin because it wasn't cool to play viola da gamba.
You fool! Now, how many violinists are there, and how many viola da gambas are there?
That's why I saw like all of these violinists in the orchestra. I think, oh, that's got to be the instrument of choice around here, I guess. I mean, look at all those people; they chose it.
I remember being in middle school, and it was jazz band, but in a middle school, so there's a lot of horns and stuff, and everybody was so loud, and I had a violin, and the guy let me just sit in a chair and strum a violin, but you couldn't hear me play a violin. And so my dad, who was a woodworker, funny story, true story, no exaggerations, he had decided to put a pickup in my violin. So I went down in our basement. He had this huge wood shop. It used to be a bar because it was the 70s. And, because friends would come over, and it was an awesome basement. It had a bar built in. But anyway, so he turned the main dance floor into a wood shop. And my brothers and sisters who are watching us are going to crack up. So he bought a guitar strap knob that was bigger than a guitar cable. And he had no musical ability whatsoever, just thinking. And he had read somewhere, probably, maybe the interwebs of 1970, that you could put a pickup on a violin. So he got a pickup, he got a guitar strap knob, and he would always meticulously draw out all the things he was going to do. And he bored a hole through the guitar strap knob so that the guitar plug would plug into there, and the pickup was attached to the violin, and I could play it through an amplifier. Wow. This was in the late 70s.
Wow.
That guitar strap knob with a guitar cable plugged into it is a standard now, and I swear to you, it did not exist in the 70s when my dad did this. And I told him years later, I bought an acoustic guitar and it had one, and I said, Dad, look at this, and I showed him the end of the guitar, and I was like, look, they've got your thing. And all he was like, I should have patented it. And it was all because I was sitting in a chair with a violin competing with saxophones and sousaphones and drums, and you could just hear me squeaking out these horrible lines. So that didn't last long. I went soon after that. My friend Mike Richardson. Hey, Mike, Marion, Ohio. His dad was a guitar player in a country band, a really, really talented guy, and so his family had all these guitars, and Mike had this old '62 Silvertone Bobcat that his dad gave him. He had a few guitars for a kid who was who was 13, and I had just Kiss had just put out their disco record. That's such a weird thing to say, guitar and then Kiss just put out. So I was a Kiss album collector, man. I was a kid. I was a teenage boy. Of course, I played with BB guns. I threw rocks at little girls because I liked them, and I had a Kiss collection. And they put out a disco record, and then they put out this album called Dynasty. I think I have those either in the same order or reverse, so I'm sure somebody will correct me. But when that happened, Dynasty was like a greatest hits, a horrible album. And I thought, oh, my God, what happened to these guys? Hey, Mike, would you like my stack of Kiss records for that guitar? And he said, sure. And then from then on out, I've been a guitar player. There's my long-winded, but I think it's funny, story of how I ended up going from violin to guitar, because you couldn't hear me. I had an amp anyway, so let's trade these disco records.
Oh, man. I'm interested in how your violin sounded. Like, do you remember what kind of pickup you used? Was it humbucker, foil?
Have you heard of Jean-Luc Ponty?
That's exactly what happened, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
My brother Matt is 10 years older than me, and his album collection was really the huge influence on me. And I discovered Jean-Luc Ponty because of being an electrified violin. And then all of a sudden Matt was like, have you heard this album? And I was like, oh, my God, look at the things you can do.
Yeah.
But then the girls just weren't digging it, you know? I mean, a Silvertone Bobcat from '62 is amazing. I actually sold that guitar foolishly when I went to college. And I was in the Air Force as well, college and Air Force in Germany. And I sold the guitar, and I've hated myself ever since. And about a year ago, I found an exact copy of one. I mean, the exact same thing, just not the one I owned, on eBay, so I bought it for way more than I probably should pay for a '62 Silvertone Bobcat, but sentimentally, I had to have it back in the collection, and I use it all the time. It's such an amazing, and you know, it's interesting. The last thing I'll say, because I don't want to hog this, but it kind of goes in line with what you're saying, is ever since that guitar, since that's the guitar I learned on, it has a very thick neck, and when I go to play other instruments, I'm very peculiar about how well I can play on them because of the thickness of the neck. If I get a really thin, like an Ibanez, which you're supposed to be super fast on, I am horrible on that guitar because my hand has been formed around this baseball bat-like neck of a guitar. It took me a while to figure out what modern equivalent was the same, and it ended up being Gibson SGs, and I was always a Fender guy. I like the Fender shape, and it was because of discovering the Gibson SG had a similar radius to the neck that I started looking at Gibsons. And sure, the SG is really the only one that really kind of matched up to this day. So on an SG, I play just smoothly, you know, not necessarily well, but I play smoothly, and it's because I learned on that thick Silvertone neck. So when I got that Silvertone Bobcat back a year ago or whatever, I just love playing it. It's like being home. I just put it on. Of course, I'm twice the size I was when I played it, but it looks like I got a little like mandolin or something. But do you guys have that experience where your instrument you learned on has influenced your ability to play future instruments, especially with the EWI event? So you're kind of stepping out into different territory, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, EWI is a weird instrument, and I mean, I had played around a little bit with some woodwinds when I was in high school, but I never really actually got, really properly learned them or got proficient on them. And the EWI is a wacky instrument because instead of having any sort of switches, it's really more along the lines of a recorder in that you, instead of resting your fingertips on holes, you rest your fingertips on these capacitive pads. And because they are these capacitive pads, you can go extremely quickly on them once you're good enough. I'm not quite there, quite honestly. Oh, wow. But trying to move from that to a saxophone, one of my old roommates, he had a saxophone, and I tried messing around with it. I got to the point where I could, actually try to play a scale, but it felt so incredibly cumbersome, and I wonder why why do people play saxophones? These are ridiculous. Play an EWI. They're great. You can play anything on them. But kind of silly that. But
I hear you.
actually, even in the piano world, and maybe the differences are less stark than in the guitar world. But some instruments, they really inspire certain things out of you. Like there is a sort of an Eastern European mark of pianos called a Petrov, and not really well known over here in America, but they're actually just wonderful pianos that are espoused by a lot of proficient jazz guys. When I play that, the combination of the action of the keyboard and the response of the high end versus the mid end range of the keyboard, and somehow it's not just inspiring me to play a certain type of music, it's actually making me a better pianist than if I was playing on a Steinway or a Baldwin or a Bosendorfer or whatever of these great pianos. It can happen that way. It's
Wow.
really surprising and fun when that happens.
Absolutely, I'd definitely agree with that because I think after a certain skill threshold, you get over a certain point with an instrument when actually the quality of the instrument really, really it really improves your playing in a strange way. I think because obviously when you're a beginner, you need to get to that point first, but once you get over that, getting a very a good quality instrument or even a different style good quality instrument to what you usually use can really inspire some different things. Because I really, really suck at playing keyboard, but we recently bought my son. We don't have space here. It's also not very practical in Japan to have acoustic pianos. So we bought my son Yamaha's latest electric piano. It's the cheapest of their line at the moment, and it's the latest it's the latest technology. So it's got the weighted key, the ground from the bottom to the top, and they're weighted, and it just feels so nice to play.
Does
and
it?
And actually, it sounds really good, and I can't believe that it's actually Yamaha's cheapest piano at the moment. But I find that when I'm just sort of banging away on my controller keyboard in front of my computer, it's really not being a keyboardist, and this will nicely segue into one of the next points coming back to our topic today. But I find that kind of banging away at the controller keyboard in front of my computer, it's really hard to sort of come up with good ideas when you're not a keyboardist, and then go to this Yamaha piano. And all of a sudden, it just feels so nice to play, and all these things are coming up that you go, where is this coming from? How am I playing this? This is good. So actually, let's segue.
I'm with you.
I think for example, as a bass player, when I sit down to write a piece of music, the first thing I'll do is make the drums and the bass. So I find it really difficult to approach writing music, if there is no need for drums and bass, because it's so comfortable to be, as a bass player, thinking about the rhythm and that kind of the harmonic foundation of the music first. So you have the rhythm, and you've got you put it in the bass line. Once you've done that, then everything else you can add just can be complementary. Obviously, melody and harmony and things like that as well come into it too. But if the call is for music that doesn't need drums or bass, I tend to find it quite difficult to know where to start. So I think that's one possibly negative thing about being a bass player. And I always sort of wish, I see these fantastic pianists and fantastic keyboard players, and I think, gee, is it actually an advantage to be a keyboardist, especially a proficient keyboardist, in writing music with DAWs these days? Because obviously note entry is far easier with a controller keyboard than it is, say, with like some tricked out bass with some MIDI pickup or something like that. So do you think that keyboardists have an advantage?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I met a neighbor here the other day, and they said they came here and they saw the studio, and she said, oh my gosh, my son is just getting into guitar. He's taking lessons. He really loves it. And I said, what instruments does he play other than guitar? And she said, guitar is his first one, and I can't recommend people enough to try a piano first. There's a knowledge that comes with the piano, and I'm horrible at piano, but I find that my brain, and again, not my main instrument. When I was 8, my parents signed me up for some lessons, and I took them for a little while, and I regret that I quit. But I'm not proficient whatsoever on a piano. I can't make runs. There's something weird about the space between the keys that my fingers just can't seem to memorize. Probably because I'm used to guitar, that the piano's got a weirder spacing between than a guitar has fret spacing. But I'm terrible at it. But I will, when I have to explain something that I'm doing on guitar to somebody, I can't look at a guitar neck and just go, oh, I'm playing this chord and it has these notes in it. I've never been a study like that. My college education was about performance. It wasn't, and it was about modal theory, but it wasn't really about learning every note and every fret on every string of the guitar. But I'll look at a piano and I'll go, oh, okay, here are the notes that's in the, the C chord, the triad. I mean, that's oversimplification because obviously I know what they are, but and on a guitar as well. But when you start to get into like flat fifths and sixths and things like that, I can tell you here's what a form looks like on a guitar for a sixth chord, but I cannot tell you what notes are in that chord. I know what key I'm in, I know what the root note is, but I don't know what the other notes are. And then I'll look at a piano and go, oh, okay, that's a B flat to get the sixth out of that, and I don't even play piano. It's just that basic knowledge of looking at that kind of linear bar of notes and going, here's how the notes work. And so I recommend, even at the basic level, that people study some piano theory or some theory on piano so that they have an understanding of how the notes all work together. Because I guess you would call a guitar two-dimensional in some ways, right? Because it's forward and it's across the neck and it's up and down the neck. That theory goes flying out the window for me in my brain.
Kyle, do you when you sit down to write music, how often do you pull out your guitar and work it out on the guitar first before you start punching stuff in on the keyboard?
I had this discussion with Mike just the other day. I've discovered that in my approach to writing, that I write all the weird stuff first. I don't really start with a bass line or a rhythm or anything like that. In my brain, I hear this affected music. I don't hear the basic music and then I go, I'm going to add an orchestral trill to it later or something like that. I hear that first and I go, oh, okay. And I get on a guitar. And I think it's because of the nature of a guitar that at least the nature of the way I play guitar, because I definitely have the belief that if I'm playing guitar and it sounds like a guitar, I've done something wrong. A guitar should sound like crazy crap. It should be all over the place. There's no reason a guitar should sound like a guitar unless you want to play at a bar and drink beer. Other than that, you've got this amazing instrument that can do all this amazing things. And it's kind of like and also I'm a huge synth nerd and I love the modular aspect of synths, and it comes from guitar. I've got all these foot pedals and all these different modules, and you're plugging this into that, and that's always been the appeal to guitar for me. So because of that, when I write the crazy crap first, and it's kind of a nightmare in some ways for people that are working with me, because they'll go, what's the chord structure? I'll be, I don't know, but listen to this wild thing I'm getting out of this. We have to work this in. And that's the stuff that when you're writing, you usually like throw away, because it makes the mix too muddy, or it's a real torturous thing. Do you guys have, I don't know if I answered your question before I'm asking you a question. So what was the question again, Alex? I should answer that first. I'm sorry.
The question was how often when you have a project that you need to complete, when you're writing music, how often do you just sit down and work it out on guitar first before you actually start punching anything into your DAW?
Gotcha. So I work out everything first. I definitely believe that you should know the entire piece before you sit down to record it, because recording is going to immediately remove you from being a musician. It's going to become technical. You're going to have, the computer's going to act funny. The keyboard's going to run out of battery power. You're going to end up in this space of complete techno crap. I love recording. I love being an engineer. I love mixing, but I can't be a musician and do that. I have to separate myself completely from that. So I try to write everything, all the parts. I'll write them down on paper. I'll script it down on paper, which sounds crazy, but I'll write the chords down. I'll have my iPhone doing one part. I'll have my iPad recording a different part. I literally will do that. Like, here's the rhythm, and it'll be on my iPhone, and then I'll record some crazy counter melody on my iPad, and then I'll try to hit play at the same time so that I can hear them work together. You know, I use all kinds of dumb techniques because I try to get all of it down before I have to go to the DAW, because the minute I go to the DAW, I'm going to have all kinds of technical issues.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's really fascinating because I'm very, I've been using tracker interfaces for, whatever it is, like 20 years, 25 years or whatever. And consequently, I feel very comfortable with them. And because of the tracker, you've got your fingers on the QWERTY keyboard most of the time. You're inputting notes that way too. So in a sense, and because it's so fast, in a sense, it becomes like an instrument in itself. The one thing that I find that distracts me from writing music is sound design. So if I don't have a whole bunch of presets that I've prepared in advance, or if I'm not using presets from other people, then things can really slow down a lot. But when you're on bass, it's not, to a certain extent you can work out chords and things like that, and it's more of a, creating melodic lines and complementary melodies in the bass line, which is where playing bass benefits, and obviously thinking about rhythm to begin with. But I'm really envious of people who play more harmonically sophisticated instruments, or at least instruments where you're able to achieve more harmonic sophistication just by yourself than the bass. I mean, I play a lot of chords on the bass too, but just being able to strum out something on the guitar or to bang out something on the piano, it's
what I like about... I think we got a delay. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to catch you there. Go ahead, Vince.
I was gonna say, it's cool being able to do that harmonically sophisticated stuff. I mean, the piano has been a real advantage to me. Like structure, a really cool harmonic progression that I want to go through over the course of this song, and I can do that relatively easily. But you were sort of you mentioned sound design, and one thing that I've been thinking about as I switch between these modes of being a pianist and being an EWIist is, when I'm a piano guy, I'm not really a sound designer. When you hit the key, there are certain things that you can do to it. Like there are advanced techniques that you can do, like very carefully flutter pedaling during the course of a note and stuff like that. But I'm not really thinking about the sound of it after I've hit it. On the other hand, with almost every other instrument out there, other keyboard instruments like the organ, your guitarist, especially with electric guitar, your stringed instruments, your wind instruments, thinking about the sound of the note that you're actually making as you're making it, and how am I going to change this over time. It's actually incredibly fun to not think about that larger harmonic structure, the overarching song structure, and be like, wow, this is going to be the sound at this moment, and then a half second later I'm going to get up to this volume with this vibrato, with this amount of overblowing on my synthesized saxophone or whatever. It's a really different mode, and it's great to be able to do that for me as a composer. This is a really new thing to actually come to grips with as both a composer and performing for my own recordings and productions.
I find also that for piano and bass, I associate bass with this as well, because bass for me is a melodic instrument that's focused on the rhythm of the piece. It's kind of like, it sounds kind of dumb, so I'm not going to say what I was going to say. But a lot of people don't think about why do you have to play a bass to get a lot out of it? Because a guitar, you've got these 6 strings in this little square box, and you put these little forms in there. Tonally, you are limiting yourself to about 4 frets. But when you write something on the bass, you don't really have that luxury. Sure, you've got the box and you've got the 4 strings, but the minute you want to get up into the higher register, you have to leave. And I don't have to leave if I'm on a guitar. And so I'm limiting myself to this almost like to be kind, if I play a full chord, and guitar is full of power chords, I could use 3 octaves. But hold on here, sorry about that, I was getting something here. But what I like about bass, and it's also the same thing I like about piano, why I think it's important that people write on, well, all instruments, but I think that people who write on piano and in some ways right on bass, are automatically lending themselves to a broader scope of composition, tonally, where guitar, you're not. And I think comping is going to be the #1 thing that I would say to a guitarist. You know, if you're going to be a guitarist and you want to write orchestral music, you need to bone up on all the comping techniques you can get your hand on. You need to know every option of where you can put a different E chord or a different A chord. You can't just stay down at the end of the neck or just a little bit in the middle of the neck, you know. You need to understand that if you go past the 12, that the A looks like this now. That's kind of unfair because the A would look the same. But there are different ways to play A to get different tones out of them. If you wanted a full tone and you're past the 12, you know, so, and it's very uncomfortable to play a form 1 bar chord up past the 12, you know, so you got to find tricky ways to play an A up there that involves fewer notes but has a broader tonal palette. And bass kind of forces you to do that too because you're running these melody lines. Sure, you can run them in the box and stay within a couple of octaves, but if you reach out of the box, which is what the bass kind of drives you to do, it kind of pushes you away when you hit the upper registry, it forces you to start to write these broader themes. Piano does too. That's what I love about pianists, and I wish I was a writer that primarily used piano as my instrument because I would automatically be moving away from this center place. But as a guitarist, and the #1 problem I have writing on guitar is that I am trained to be in this small little area of the neck. And so I'm really jealous of you guys who can move out of there and go into other places.
It's interesting that you would, I mean, I agree entirely with what you're saying about piano. It's interesting that you would put bass and piano in together there because I find that, you know, as a bass player, I don't, other than thinking about rhythm a lot and thinking about how the bass plays with the rhythm and then thinking about how bass lines work with the overall harmony and how bass lines have, you know, some counterpoint or complement to the melody, I don't find that actually being a bass player is that useful. I just think that from a practical day-to-day workflow point of view, you know, if I was a keyboardist, it would be really, really easy to, you know, because this is my instrument anyway. So, you know, if I want to just like, oh, let's put in a solo here. Okay, I'll just play the solo into my DAW. Let's put in these chords here. It just would seem so much more efficient. However, yeah, so I agree with what you're saying about piano, but it's interesting that you would put bass in there together. I think, unfortunately, I often sort of think to myself, gee, I wish I was a better pianist instead of just being a bass player because it's not, other than the rhythm and the harmonic foundation, I've never found it to be that useful, actually.
You know who moves around on the bass a lot? And when I decided I wanted to learn bass, I just learned every piece of music that I could from this guy. And it's Chris Squire from the band Yes.
Oh, nice.
He is all over the place. You know another guy who's an amazing bass player and doesn't really get credit for it? Well, I mean, he gets credit for everything. He's one of the gods of pop. But is Paul McCartney. If you listen to Paul McCartney bass lines, you will be educated on what a bass does against what the other instruments are doing. He really knows how to fill out a sound. But Chris Squire is not really like Paul McCartney in the way that he's filling out the sound purposefully. It's that he's doing so much on a bass that he accidentally is filling out the sound, and in addition, he's expanding where the bass can go. I definitely recommend listening to those guys.
The two bass players that I would recommend for exactly that, I mean, obviously the one that everybody comes back to is James Jamison from the Motown Funk Brothers, of course. But other than that, there are two lesser known but absolutely wonderfully educational bass players. One of them is Bruce Thomas from Elvis Costello's band.
Oh, that's awesome.
Elvis Costello's band was called not the Imposters.
Wasn't it the Imposters? I thought it was the Imposters.
Right. Anyway, if you listen to any of Elvis Costello's work from the 70s or the 80s, you'll hear Bruce Thomas on bass. Now, that is some really, really inspired bass playing from a harmonic point of view. Like, if you listen to what he's doing down there, absolutely incredible. The other one that gets absolutely no recognition at all, but is incredible from a musical point of view, is Rutger Gunnarsson from ABBA's band.
Oh.
So, what was that?
I couldn't say enough good things about ABBA. It's almost embarrassing. When I was growing up, to say you liked ABBA was a death sentence. But I loved ABBA, and it was
Yeah,
because musically it is so sophisticated.
yeah, exactly. If you listen to what Gunnarsson does in the bass, he was their session bassist for all of their albums. I think. I don't think they ever used anybody else. And you listen to don't listen to the famous songs. Listen to the less famous songs and have a listen to what he's doing in the bass line. That's really the way that he works together with that. 101 interesting things that you can do with a disco beat, right?
Yeah.
This is really, really incredible. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to learn from bassists, I think, in listening to them, but just from a day-to-day like composition point of view, unless you're making music that's going to need like a very nice, melodic running bass line, yeah, I don't know. I've just never really found it to be that much of an advantage. Maybe it's a case of the grass is green on the other side. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, maybe so, maybe so. There's a guy who I'm a huge fan of. I'm sorry, Vincent, we're kind of hogging this. I'm coming to you next. I grew up on a lot of Roxy music. Again, my brother was 10 years older than me, and he had this amazing record collection, and it was filled with Roxy music. I don't know if you guys listen to Roxy music, but Roxy music was, they had some hits in the 70s, but they're way more popular now than they were at their time. But Brian Eno came out of that band, and more importantly than that, Brian Ferry came out of there. And I can't believe I just said more importantly than that, because I'm an Brian Eno devotee. But Brian Ferry has a way of writing that is very precise. And what's interesting about it to me is that no matter what song you listen to by Brian Ferry, doesn't matter. Go get anything by Brian Ferry from Boys or Girls on, from like 1985 on, especially Boys and Girls, which I just bought on LP. I'm proud to say.
Nice.
He uses bass. You can see played the primary role when he was writing the music, because the groove is established. There is no question about the groove, and he has formed his whole musical identity on this groove. He's kind of if you can imagine having a funk groove in a tuxedo, that's Brian Ferry. It's those two things. It's this slowed down, sophisticated, champagne celebrating, tuxedo wearing, opera attending funk, which makes no sense when you put those two together. But you listen to a Brian Ferry record and you go, oh, I get it. Completely makes sense. And he's got Marcus Miller on almost every one of his solo records from 85 on. There's nothing, it's just there. That is such an amazing instrument to be writing music on. And when you take pop tunes, and I'm sure you guys do this too, and Vince, I want to come to you about this because I want to see your take on this. Do you ever listen to pop, because I do, and go, okay, replace the guitar with a violin, replace the bass with some cellos, replace the vocalist with a horn section, and here is a classical piece of music that's just beautiful. It was just rendered in pop instruments. I think of people like Paul McCartney, I think of people like Brian Ferry as being just as amazing as a Grieg or a Rachmaninoff. They're just using a different palette of instruments. Vince, do you think the same way?
Oh, I mean, sometimes more so. There's a lot of music and in the concert art music repertory that's really pretty darn simple when you look at it as a whole. I always like to bring up Franz Liszt. And Liszt does all these things which are, that's really fancy stuff that he has that piano soloist doing. But compositionally, it's all 5 in 1. It's 5 in 1. That's it. Nothing interesting there, and you could totally make a case that there's so much stuff that's been developed with modern pop music, with all the really interesting transitions and really interesting ways of using the tonality of these instruments in order to make what wouldn't be considered a proper modulation, but it works because of the way they actually perform on their instrument. Sometimes I'll think, that's a pretty darn good piece of music. And I have a lot of fun actually trying to keep up with some, pop and rock music still.
Yeah.
Yeah. The pop music is. I'm a shameless devotee to 80s pop music. I don't care what anybody thinks or what everybody says. Fortunately, now I think people are starting to realize, holy crap, there's some pretty good music back there in the 80s. But just as far as it's easy to, I guess because it was the first time music sounded that glossy and that kind of refined and that sort of perfect, that especially coming out of the 70s where it was all experimental and it had to be avant-garde and it had to be different. Coming to the 80s and everything's so pristine, and obviously recording technology is getting better, and then the advent of the synthesizer in pop music introduced a whole new palette of I guess more clinical sound, especially when you look at it from the context of the analog synthesis and also the experimental days of the 70s. All of a sudden everything was very, very pristine, and so it's easy to put 80s pop music down as being clinical and soulless. But from a musical point of view, there's a certain, I don't know, it could be an age thing. I mean, because I grew up in the 80s, so it could be a sort of a nostalgia thing. I think that could be some part of it. But even my son's 5, and his favorite music is Elvis Costello, ABBA, Billy Joel, and who's the other one? Stevie Wonder.
Oh, that's just good parenting.
That's great.
Yeah, it might be that's the only CDs that we actually have around here. That could be what it is. But there is a certain, even he recognizes when we put on, some, I don't know, like, Journey or Foreigner or, Toto or, any of these like sort of typical 80s bands. He really, there's a melodic aspect there that he really gets into, and there's a harmonic aspect there which is somehow mysteriously moving, and then of course there's that kind of disco influenced typical pop rock beat that they always have in that played on like some what would be like Roland TR-606 or something like that.
I have to tell you a story if you don't mind. I was playing in a band in the 90s. That's what I tried to do. That's why I moved to LA, is because I wanted to be a rock star. I'd worked really hard at it. I was sleeping on floors and getting rides home from people that were amazing that I had met. It was an amazing time. No car, just guitar and an amp, and just trying to play everywhere. And I studied jazz, right? But rock was really, rock is machismo. Rock is amazing when you're on a guitar. There's something about being a jazz guitarist, but then there's a whole different thing that comes with being a rock guitarist. And I was playing in a kind of dark goth band, if you would, for the longest time. We did an interesting thing. The name of the band was Nothing, and so we used to have posters that would say "Nothing happens Thursday night at 7." I thought that was pretty cheeky, pretty amazing.
That sounds like.
But then again, yeah, it was not good marketing, because we'd have like 4 people show up for the show just so they were curious what was actually happening, and their friends were saying nothing's happening, so don't go. But we ended up opening for some pretty amazing people. We opened up for 9 Inch Nails. We opened up for Toad the Wet Sprocket. But usually at like these festival kind of things that we would be this band that they would just, we got lucky. So there we are. I'm not being as successful. We had a drummer, got in a drug problem, kind of broke up the whole thing. We were a clean band, which I was very happy to say. But it does infect it. So it came to an end. But what was interesting is I had a guitar case, and I still have it out there, that has a huge sticker on it that we thought was so important to have. And it says, "Corporate rock sucks." Was led by corporate rock, was all of that classic, what's it? That's not it. Homer was kind of in there. The point I'm trying to make is that I would have that bumper stick or that sticker on my guitar, and I would go to gigs and I would play this wild, crazy post-punk music, and then I'd go home, I'd crank up my amps, and I'd play Led Zeppelin for hours. And I had to maintain this opinion that corporate rock sucked, but yet I love it so much, And when you said Foreigner, it just kicked off that memory of how I would play Cold as Ice on a loop, and yet would go to gigs, with mascara and try to be completely antisocial. Isn't it amazing how music will, your instrument will lead you in a direction, and your peer pressure will lead you in another direction, and you've got to somehow separate those and maintain that that facade. Do you guys have that with any of the instruments you grew up playing, or anything you're doing today? Is there like, I mean, being a tracker, Alex, is there a part of like society that says this is not something that people should be doing?
Um, I think trying to work off the demo scene influences, like the first music, my first love for music. My father, so I started on viola da gamba, as I mentioned, then harpsichord, and then piano and violin. I did French horn for a while as well, and then bass guitar and a bit of guitar. But the love of music was always the demo scene. So, are you guys familiar with what demo scene music is?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
So it's really, really hard when that is your love of music. You know, it's really, really hard to sort of pull that influence away. Everything I do tends to sound like demo scene music. That's not a good thing. You know, I think that's demo scene music obviously has its place, but just because of that, then obviously that bleeds into 80s pop music, of course, where the sound palette is the same, because a lot of the demo scene music came off of samples pulled off of like D50s and DX7s, the early demo scene music before the digitizer became the digitizer. We had a digitizer for the Amiga, which is like this naked PC board that you just plug into the parallel port at the back. It's like this naked board, you know, like assembled at Radio Shack or something. You plug in you plug in your little mini jack in there and plug that into
that's dedication at that point.
Yeah. Anyway, because the sound palette was similar, so demo scene music leads you in the direction of 80s pop music, or it leads you in the direction of techno, of course. So coming into that as a bass player, I found that bass was a whole lot of fun to play, and I'm playing a whole lot of bands and stuff. So playing like, you know, the average stuff that you would play in a high school rock band, you know, the Beatles and Queen and stuff like that.
There's some just corporate rock for you. Queen.
Yeah. There was never really it was never embarrassing, I don't think, but there was never any connection between the two of those. So you had the rock music on that side that you play on an instrument, and you have the demo scene or the music that you listen to or you try to make yourself on the Amiga or whatever on this side. So for me there was never any connection between those two. So I can't really say if there was any.
It's a bit vague of a question.
Yeah, how about you, Vince?
Yes.
Oh, actually, man, the demo scene. I guess when I got into it might have been a little bit later than you, but I think a lot of my favorite demo scene music at the time was such because it really tried to eschew all those conventions and try to do things that were more acoustic or more orchestral or more avant-garde. You had, guys like, the dudes in Five Musicians, which was sort of like the super tracking group of the 90s demo scene, and that was Necros and Basshead. Who else? Big Jim. I think Alex Brandon was actually a part of Five Musicians for a while too. And you had them trying to do all these wacky styles, like, here's something that's really just bebop jazz, and then here's something that's sort of very prog rock, and then here's another thing that's actually recutting bits of Wynton Marsalis into something that's not quite jazz, but totally, but has a sort of funk to it, And so that was really exciting for me, actually.
This must have been in what the Fast Tracker and Scream Tracker, Impulse Tracker era?
Yeah, definitely the Scream Tracker, Fast Tracker era. Right, yeah, so out of PC and out of Amiga and going into PC and 8-channel and 16-channel mods.
Right. Because sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, you still had some of those limitations, of people still sort of look down on you if you decided to release a mod that was 4 megabytes or something like that. No, of course you wouldn't do that, but. I mean, you totally could because it was possible with those PC trackers at the time. But the way that certain trackers really wanted to take advantage of this new technology and try to push it in these weird aural directions that were just so new and fresh to not just them but all the listeners at the time.
Yeah, this is it's an interesting point because it sort of comes back to our topic of your instrument because the music that I loved the most that I grew up on was the 4-channel Amiga demo scene music. So being 4 channels was the limit that you had. The technical achievement in a song was as important as the musical achievement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really interesting thing when you think about it because it means that you're looking, because you see the music when you're playing it in the tracker, it's right there, you can see it going by. You're watching it and you're thinking, wow, that's really clever what he's done there, and oh, that's cool how he did that. So there's a sort of a technical prowess that is on show, as well as an artistic or a musical prowess that's on show. And it's really interesting that I think as an extension of the topic today, for me, myself, it took me a long time to understand that music could be much more than just technical achievement. So even now, I guess techno is easy in that regard because, it's very easy to find techno that's produced incredibly well, especially in the 90s when techno was really expanding very quickly. A lot of it was like, wow, listen to what he's doing there, listen to that, wow, that's amazing. It took me a long time to realize that music could be so much more than just technical achievement. And in fact, you can have music that has very, very little in the way of technical achievement or technical sort of technical significance or impressiveness, but just is purely artistic in its impact. And it took me a long time to learn how to appreciate that kind of music. So I think as an extension of the instrument that you grew up on, I think the music that you listened to when you were growing up on as well, very directly shapes the way that you appreciate other people's music, and of course the way that you evaluate and appreciate your own music.
Mm-hmm.
So true.
Yeah.
I'm having a
thinking
major...
about I'm thinking about the virtuosity of some of those trackers at the time, and yeah, sometimes I would open up Purple Motion. Some of my favorite pieces of Purple Motion were actually his 2-channel mods, which were just mind-blowingly fantastic because it was not just the virtuosity of these incredibly quick, because they were incredibly fast BPM tracks, but also the thought that went into the larger structure of the melody. It wasn't just an awesome sounding mod. I mean, I could hum the tune for Zaka 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 Zak because it's a really good melody in that thing, and it's amazing how clear that is. The fact that the artistry and the beauty of the melody can be carried courtesy of this pure exercise of virtuosity, and how the two can actually really come together to create something that is so great.
Yeah, one of the I won't go on too long about trackers because I'm sure Kyle is actually yawning inside his closed mouth there.
I love them, man. I was if I can interject one thing really quickly before the subject moves on, is that you were talking about how you can look at trackers and see the musical prowess, the technical prowess of the music being written, and the same thing happens on a sheet of paper, right? I love looking at sheet music, and I am the worst sheet music reader you're ever going to meet. You don't hire me if you've got like some read it off the page kind of thing. I'm the wrong guy because it'll take me forever. But I'm fascinated by watching what somebody thought out, and I still sit down with a pencil and paper to this day and try to become that person who can write sheet music and do really interesting things. So I'm envious of the ability to do that. I don't play an instrument that leads to sheet music, really, honestly, and I don't do trackers, which has that technical kind of thing. Amazing.
Yeah, there was one. If anybody's interested to check out what the sort of the pinnacle, in my opinion at least, of Amiga tracker music as far as technical prowess, there's a guy called Dizzy. Probably if you go to YouTube and search for Amiga, AMIGA, and then Dizzy, and then like mod or something like that, you probably might find a few songs that people have uploaded there. But his stuff was incredible for 4 channels. It basically sort of jazz fusion, and he would, I guess he would record all of the parts in through a digitizer. There's that word again.
Aren't we all digitizers technically?
We are now.
We're doing some digitizing right now.
Yeah, we are now. Yeah, but anyway, there's some great stuff anyway to check out. But yeah, the one negative thing that I think that coming from a tracker background gives you is that it does give you a sort of a disproportionate, it weights you towards the side of something has to be technically proficient for it to be impressive. So, even like dubstep and things like, what's it called, complextro, if you've ever heard of that, like even stuff like, it's just like so crazy. From a musical point of view, yeah, sure, if you hear it in a club, it'll certainly get your booty moving, but I mean, other than that,
when you don't want to see my booty moving, that's a bad thing.
Other than that, I mean, there's a certain small part of me that just sort of gets some voyeuristic pleasure about listening to all of the crazy stuff that they're doing in those tracks.
Back to Black MIDI.
No, oh boy. No.
I was going to say I wanted to bring this up because I wanted to put a link in the chat room. I posted on my Twitter. I'm working on a feature film. Yay! I love it. It's very awesome, and I'm trying to create crazy-ass guitar parts for it. And so I created a quadraphonic surround sound chase of the sounds.
I saw about it. What's that about? I saw that on your Twitter thing. I didn't really understand what it is you were trying to achieve.
I'm going to put the link in there. So this is what sucks about being a guitar player and trying to compose music, if you will, rather than just like rock out on an A chord that's doing some funky things, is that it involves all of this technology, and I really love it, man. I can't. That's the best part about it for me. And I'm going to pose the question now and bring it to you guys. Is with your instrument, knowing the instrument is just the beginning of the journey. You know what I mean? It's everything you can do with the instrument that becomes what keeps me involved in it. And so I've got this 4-amp setup, a mix between tube amps and solid state amps. And the amp 1 is tube, amp 2 is solid state, amp 3 is tube, amp 4 is solid state. And I'm chasing sounds around, and I'm using an electroharmonic switchblade to guide my guitar to either this pedal board or this pedal board, and one pedal board has a looper on it, one does not. And so I can create all these soundscapes that go all over. I used to tour around and do soundscapes, and I loved it, but it's really complicated stuff. And Brian Ferry being that's it. I love a lot of guitar players, but I said Brian Ferry. I'm sorry, I meant Robert Fripp. Robert Fripp for me is just the guitar god, and when I saw him do a soundscape once, as much as I loved King Crimson, I thought, I got to figure out how to do this. And there were rules. This is where I'm going with this. There were rules to how you do a soundscape that people don't know. They don't have any idea. And so when you're playing, I'm kind of capturing all of this talk into one thing. I'm sorry. I talked about earlier about how I write from the point of all the stuff that you would normally get rid of because it muddies up the mix, the really crazy stuff. I don't write from the foundation. I write from the soundscape that's happening in the background. And there are rules for how you do a soundscape, and Robert Fripp is who introduced me to that by listening to his stuff. And Robert Fripp, to do soundscapes, realized I had to buy a specific guitar, which is a Fernandez Monterey Elite, which I use, which has the sustainer pickup in it so that you can strum a chord and it just lasts. As long as you don't move your hand, it'll last for days. Just if you've got enough food and tea and you don't move your hand, that chord will play. Don't sleep. It'll just play.
I like how you said food and tea.
Well, you need those two things, right? Because the tea keeps you up and the food keeps you sustained. So, but that's the idea of that guitar. It's an EBow on every string. You have to have that, and you have to have this bunch of crazy effects, which is what I've always felt guitars should be using anyway. Again, getting away from the typical sound of a guitar and doing something more with it. And so in that picture I have, or in that video, I have one pedal. I didn't put them on my pedal train, so some people who are looking at that are going, "Oh my God, Kyle, you've got them all lined up in a line. If you bunched them all together, your foot wouldn't have to travel so far." Screw you, people. I like it that way. I've got a long chain of effects over here, and then on this other side, I've got another pedal board, a MIDI pedal board that I've got hooked up to my looper and up to this Roland GP100, which I can't swear by enough. And by the way, I own Robert Fripp's old GP100, true story, right here. So you need to have this like amazing amount of equipment so that you can create these amazing sounds. And what I love about guitar, and what I love about having the ability to have all of this stuff linked together is that with just a modicum of intelligence of making sure there's no hum because you've got different grounds, of making sure that you've lined your pedals up in the proper order so that you don't have a delay before a distortion. All you got to know a little bit, that's what I love about guitar, you got to know a little bit and know your instrument, and then you can do these amazing sounds that nobody can do. And I get so kind of sad that in game audio there isn't more guitar. You know, I released once to a game company an entire EBO score of their game, and they still didn't like it. They said they wanted something different. I gave it to them, and they didn't like it, and they didn't like it because it didn't sound orchestral enough. And I'm saying it doesn't have to be an orchestra. We need to move beyond these limits of our imagination and making orchestral music. I love orchestral music, but there's so much more you can do. And some people are doing that, like Tyler Bates, I think, is a guy who's really taking guitar and doing some amazing things with it. And so anyway, I've been really long-winded about it. I just wanted to make sure that people knew that just because you're in the game audio world and they're expecting you to create some sort of orchestral score, don't be afraid to reach out beyond that. Don't be afraid to grab an EWI and say, here's some amazing things that you weren't expecting from an EWI. Here's some amazing things that you weren't expecting from a bass. Because in the end, and I just saw this today from the Sony guy who went to Game Music Connect, he said, we have major titles, which we go and get our major orchestrators for, our major game audio orchestral people for, and then we have a bunch of little titles, and we want inventive scores. Did I bring it down to a good point? Because I went crazy for a minute.
I think it was the Fripp. As soon as Fripp came into the conversation, you kind of rocketed off.
Yeah, I'm a little nutty about the Frippster. I'm a little crazy about that. I mean, I am not fibbing to you when I say that I have RE201s that are hooked into each other so that I can try to recreate Frippertronics, which he did with tape decks, but I'm doing it with RE201s. They got tapes in them. Let's do it.
No, I'd have to agree with you. I think once I tried to, I actually I considered a 6-string bass so that I could work out chords more easily on it than a 4-string.
Yeah.
Ended up getting a 5-string and making a custom nut so that it would be EADGC instead of with the B at the bottom, because the low B was kind of useless, being so low. But in the end, it's sort of, the bass, for me at least, from a mental point of view, it's very, very useful to be thinking about what would this bass line do if I was playing it, or sometimes pull out the bass and try to play it myself. And of course, from a rhythmic point of view, how can I make this rhythm more interesting and more connected with the bass? But always envious of keyboard players.
Yeah,
and guitarists now too.
No, I'm so glad I'm not doing keyboard for everything, because when you're on keyboard, you're stuck about where to go. On a keyboard, the only place to go is another note, and if you're not dealing with notes, you got this whole other space that you've got there. Oh, I can do more even while the note is sustaining. And that seems obvious when you think about, the MIDI standard, I'm going to change my CC volume, I'm going to change my modulation wheel, something. But no, it's so cool to have another mode where you can think about a different way for the music, the melodic line, the bass line, whatever, to progress, that it's not just another note.
Yeah.
Sounds like we've kind of arrived at a group hug moment.
Well, I mean, it's all about the show is about presenting people your options. Don't be afraid of reaching out. And I mean, isn't that the truth? Isn't that what game audio is about? Is saying, let's not depend upon the stereotypical movie montages and movie with tropes musically. Let's do something interesting. When I played Diablo for the first time and those guitars started ringing, I bought that game because of 12-string guitar. There is no doubt about it. I was playing it at a friend's house. 12-string guitar caused me to purchase that game. And I've been thinking to myself, A, we need to get Matt Uelman on here, and B, how did he get away with that? It's got to be that Valve. I wonder. Here's another question. I wonder if Valve is now Sure, Valve puts out new Diablos and they have 12-string guitars in them, and not just 12-string. I don't want to sound ignorant. There's all kinds of guitar work in there. Let's just say guitar work. But why didn't they do it on other games? Why did they just do it on Diablo? Is it because they started to grow big? In the beginning, they were small, and they said, we need something that'll stand out. And then once they got big, they thought, okay, now we need an orchestral score. Do game companies do that? Do they say, let's do something experimental, and then it's a huge hit for them, and then they go, okay, let's go to the standard? I'm not saying that orchestral music is bad. I certainly don't, because I spend my fair amount of time trying to write orchestral music, and I'm very envious of those people like Mike Shapiro and all those people who can do amazing, amazing orchestral scores. There's a knowledge there that I literally don't know, and I need to learn, and I'm spending a lot of time trying to figure it out. But I hate, on the other hand, that game music has said orchestra. That's what we want. I mean, if it's Call of Duty, we want an orchestra. If it's something else, we want an orchestra. If it's an adventure game, we want an orchestra.
It's probably because visually a lot of these games are chasing that cinematic film-like experience. The game itself is trying to be a substitute for going to a movie cinema, so they're wanting that kind of cinematic. And I guess just because of how saturated the film industry is with orchestral music, people are conditioned now to sort of hear orchestral music as being epic and cinematic and stuff like that. And I think, well, we come back to it often on this Game Audio Hour, but it's just important to stick to your guns, isn't it? I mean, if you don't feel good about making orchestral music because you don't think you're good at it, then don't. Just make rock music. Just make. I mean, in my case, I couldn't make orchestral music for shit, so I don't. So, I think hopefully, I mean, I've certainly certainly not as established as you two are, but I think just getting, hopefully at the end of the day, if you do it enough, then people will start recognizing you for that specific sound. And I think the game audio industry and our game audio community benefits from having that diversity. If you want this, then you go to that guy. If you want this, you go to that guy.
Yeah, I mean, we've learned that, haven't we? I mean, and I've learned that in the span of doing this show, and a lot of it came from Vince, actually, and his talking about being an audio director and what he's looking for, is that I thought I had to be, even in my years being in this, I still was trying to be everything for everybody, and I just can't do it. I got to do my strength, and I've got to, and it's part of the sale. I mean, let's be honest. You got to pitch it. You got to kiss the babies. You got to shake the hands. But you got to go out there with some confidence and say, I've created this entire guitar orchestra. I think you'll love it. Let's just listen to it for a minute, And if you put a lot of the heart and soul into it, it may get rejected, sure. But we live in the world of rejection. That's what we do. We've chosen to allow rejection to be part of our lives by taking on this as a profession. And so let's just throw that to the side. Who gives a crap if it gets rejected? That doesn't mean that you should turn around and say, oh, my God, they keep rejecting it. Nobody likes this stuff. It's horrible. That's the easy human reaction. Let's not let that happen. Let's accept that rejection is part of the deal, but we are actually doing something that there are people out there who really want to hear it. And all we've got to do is convince a couple of producers that this is a good thing, And the way you do that is by being positive, not being afraid that they're going to reject you, and keep on keeping on when it comes to the thing that you believe in, right? Is that where we're going with this? That's the way I feel about it.
Hear.
Yeah.
Hear.
So I guess I should hang up now that I've given a speech. Isn't that the way this works? Kyle gives like an end of the show speech about how you're supposed to be believing in yourself. Should I hold a boombox when I do that and try to get a girl to go out with me?
Just a megaphone. Just all you need is a megaphone.
It feels the same. Okay, guys. Well, it's 7:11, and as much as I want to keep talking about this because I've got a bunch of anecdotes, which one of them is, by the way, I bought the Soft Cells album called, what is their famous record? Nonstop Erotic Cabaret. You were talking about 80s pop. I love Tainted Love. Great song. The rest of that album is horrible. It's terrible. It's amazing how in that day one song could ride an entire record. I put the next song in, and my wife was in the kitchen, and she goes, "What is that?" And she's a singer professionally, and I said, "Oh, that's Nonstop Erotic Cabaret." And she goes, "No, I meant what is happening." I was like, yeah, that's a singer not doing a very good job, but it made the whole record. So, okay, I could go on forever. I'm going to stop. I'm going to say thank you guys for being on the show. That was such a great topic, man. I got so deep into it. I hope I didn't hog the thing, but thanks for your input, guys.
Vince,
No problem.
never mention Fripp again.
Oh yeah, be
Yeah,
careful.
now we know. Now
Yeah,
we
be
know.
careful there. There's a whole thing. There's a whole story. I'd love to tell you this. Okay, I gotta stop the broadcast. I'm hanging up.
Okay.
All right.